Hello, and welcome to Insight Memory Care's monthly care partner training. This month, we'll be talking about how to cover extended and long-term care costs. Our presenter is Jordan Albert, and he's from the EBA Wealth Strategies team. He will be talking about generalize how to work with long-term costs without any slides today. So we are hoping for a lot of question and answers of this very personalized topic. Our mission here at Insight is to provide specialized care, support, and education for individuals in all stages of memory and cognitive impairment, their care partners, and the community. Our vision is a community where those living with memory or cognitive impairment and their care partners can achieve the highest quality of life. Our monthly care partner trainings are geared towards families and caregivers caring for loved ones at home. They're free and open to the public. And feel free to learn more about our organization and find upcoming classes at insightmcc.org.
Hey, good afternoon. As Melissa said, my name is Jordan Albert, and I'm a financial advisor at EBA Wealth Strategies, which is a franchise of Ameriprise. And I've been in the financial industry since 2015. In that time, I spent 7 years working on the institutional side of the world and 2 years working with individuals as a financial advisor. Often in our lives, we're confronted with the question of how do we fund care costs for our loved ones? And, it's a challenge that many people come across. In the Northern Virginia area, these costs are typically quite expensive relative to other parts of the country. And we believe it requires even greater planning to strategize how to fund these care costs. From a financial planning perspective, we found that the key is to identify which funding strategy best accommodates your loved one's needs. Historically, there are a few key ways that people fund extended care costs. And the first is traditional long-term care insurance. And with long-term care insurance, this can take the form of a permanent insurance policy, which is one where you pay monthly premiums and the cash value builds over time that can be accessed if you need it for care costs. And then alternatively, there's a more limited kind of long-term care insurance where if you need it, the benefits are there up to a certain amount. But at the same time, if you don't use it, the policy does not carry the benefit. And these policies can be used to fund all care costs or a portion of the care costs, kind of like an insurance copay, is how I would think about it. And depending on the policy structure, the underwriting process for your health at the time of the policy, and how you want to structure the policy, the costs can vary dramatically. So the key is to isolate what you're most looking for and what aligns with your financial plan to best isolate which insurance structure works best for you. The second possible funding solution is the use of annuities, which is essentially taking a contribution on an annual basis or a lump sum contribution into an insurance type contract. And then it pays out on a monthly basis, depending on the amount of benefit in the contract. And that can be used to fund monthly long-term care costs, but can also be used as a way to replace monthly income if funds in the household are going to care costs. And the last is self-funding from your assets. So if you decide not to pursue long-term care insurance or the annuity strategy, there is always funding from your cash reserves and your non-IRA assets and retirement accounts to be able to fund care costs. Now, the beautiful thing is that between all of these different strategies, it doesn't have to be just one. You can pick a combination of all three or just one, and it's really based on what financial situation works best for you. And then prior to someone requiring care, our view is that the key is to balance which strategy best meets your needs and develop a plan for how the cash flow can be structured to accomplish your goals. If these care needs have already arisen, my view is the first step is to review your income and assets and determine what level of funding can be achieved from the income and assets that you currently have. Additionally, if Medicaid becomes necessary at any time, our recommendation is to always consult with a Medicaid planning attorney. These folks can work with you to figure out from an estate planning perspective, what structure best meets your needs, and then also how to accelerate the qualification process by segmenting your assets. And I've provided Melissa my contact information, and we have not only myself and other advisors on staff, but also can refer to any estate planning attorney to assist with wills, or additionally a Medicaid planning attorney to assist with that process as well. And as you plan for care costs, how we work with clients in particular on different planning strategies is that we start by comparing the costs of the care that they're looking at by different alternative options and look at, what care are you looking for and what best fits those needs. And then additionally, we then do a full financial planning overview and compare that with your income, cash reserves, household expenses, and assets to be able to figure out what that proper balance is that best meets your needs. And the goal, ultimately is to calculate the most efficient way to fund care costs, whether that's through some assets, different assets, and kind of triangulating what makes most sense from a personal standpoint, but also a financial and tax planning standpoint as well. And, kind of in summary, as you consider the information presented, my view is that the key is always to develop that strategy before the care costs ensue. And that way, you kind of know going in what your game plan is and how you intend to plan for these situations. For more in-depth analysis, both I and my team over at EVA Wealth Strategies, just across the parking lot from Insight, are always available for initial consultations. And if you'd like to explore the benefits of financial planning and different long-term care considerations, we're always happy to discuss. And additionally, we also manage assets for folks, which is another part of our service, but that combines with the financial planning in order to ensure that everyone we work with has full visibility into their long-term financial goals. And I know that was a fairly short opening remarks, but I was talking with Melissa, and I think the most productive use of time would be to kind of open it up for questions. And that way, if there's something in particular that someone has concerns about, I'm happy to discuss our perspective.
So if you guys can put your questions in the Q&A, please, and I can present them to him for those of you that are online. People that are in person, feel free to raise your hand and he'll answer your questions. One I asked him earlier is, when should you get long-term care insurance? When's the right age?
So the long answer is there's no perfect age, because even if it is more costly in later years, it can also be very, very beneficial if something were to ever arise. I think in our opinion, the kind of sweet spots, so to speak, from a cost and benefit standpoint would be usually in your late 40s and early 50s. And typically, if you're applying in your early 40s, we consider that a little bit too early, because if you were to apply 5, 6, 7, 8 years later, the premiums are generally very similar, but can vary between underwriting and policy. And the benefits are you're paying premiums for longer, which creates accrued costs. So generally, I would say mid 40s all the way up to early 50s would be kind of that sweet spot. And then, after your late 50s and your early 60s, that's when it becomes extremely more expensive and the premiums jump up.
So one of our questions online is, how much is long-term care insurance costing?
So long-term care insurance has a very broad range of costs. So I know that isn't the perfect answer to the question, but for different long-term care insurance policies, it depends on the amount of benefit that you're seeking and for how many years. So, for example, you could do a policy for 2 years of benefit with $7,000 a month in care costs. And that would be much less expensive than, say, a 6-year policy with $10,000 a month. And some of the other things that you can factor into long-term care insurance are what's called a waiting period, which is how long between a diagnosis and not being able to do 2 of the 6 activities of daily living between the insurance company then paying the cost. So typically, it ranges between 30 and 180 days, which means in that period, you'd be self-funding all care costs. And it definitely varies based on policy benefit amount. But if you'd like to see any illustrations or specific quotes, please definitely reach out when Melissa provides my contact information, and happy to assist.
All right, our next, go ahead.
I have a question regarding that. Do you find, and it probably depends upon the company and the plan that you have, do the premiums remain the same or can they fluctuate?
So initially, when long-term care policies were written, they had about 40 years of data to go on. Whereas term insurance policies, they had over 100 years of data. So they could really triangulate what that sweet spot number was for what to charge for premiums. For long-term care policies, with that more limited data, they started undercharging, or they charged less than they thought they'd need to for those policies. So in the past few years, folks have been getting letters that their premiums have gone up between 30 and 50% in some cases. So what the insurance commission can do is the insurance company applies to the insurance commission and says, we need to increase premiums by this amount. Will you give us approval to do it? And the Virginia Insurance Commission, along with every other state, has the ability to accept or reject it. So premiums have been going up over the past few years because they had less data. People were living longer and care costs have gone up. So that has led to sufficiently higher premiums. And typically on an annual basis, there have been some policies that have gone up 30, 40%. They typically leave it constant for 1 to 3 years, but it varies by carrier.
All right, our next question, how can the VA help a veteran financially when long-term care or assisted living is needed?
No, you have to excuse me. I'm somewhat familiar with VA benefits, but frankly, not as much as I should be. To my understanding, the VA provides a degree of medical services, but to my knowledge, I don't believe provides assisted living and memory care facility access. But I would say for kind of full visibility of that, I would contact your benefits representative through the VA to best understand the different options available.
Our next question, suppose it's too late, then what do you do?
So assuming that it's being referred to too late for long-term care insurance. So if that's the case, then kind of what I'm saying is our view is engaging in the full financial planning process to figure out what is the care needs and what do we think that's going to cost on a monthly basis, and then triangulating between assets, cash reserves, and income, kind of what that best balance is to be able to fund both living expenses, but also care costs as well. So definitely my view is in that situation, financial planning is to me the best way to kind of hone in on what that ideal strategy is. And then additionally, we work with CPAs, estate planning attorneys, Medicaid planning attorneys, and kind of quarterback the process to ensure that all the people who are advising you from a professional standpoint are on the same page.
Do you have a team of those at your company? I mean, do you have a CPA in your group, or do you refer?
We refer.
Okay.
So I am a CPA in the state of Virginia, but not a formal tax preparer.
Okay.
And what we do is refer different service providers that we work with historically, and their fee structure would be separate from ours, as we mostly do asset management and financial planning. But then we work with those professionals to work with you to find the ideal strategy across all of those professionals.
If somebody already has a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, can they still get coverage?
Generally, if a diagnosis has already occurred, coverage would be very challenging. That's when the financial planning process would ensue.
And can you explain more about using annuities?
Sure. So the concept of annuities is that it's at its core an insurance contract, and you're either paying a sum of upfront money or contributions on a monthly or annual basis in order to build up the cash value in the annuity. And once that occurs, you have the ability to either withdraw from the annuity, which will vary from a taxation standpoint depending on the amount of earnings, in the investments of the annuity. Alternatively, there is the ability to do what's called an annuitization, which is where you get a set amount of monthly income from the amount paid in. But again, calculated like an insurance contract would be. So based on life expectancy and estimated payouts.
How much does it cost to do a full financial planning with your firm?
So our costs range anywhere between $1,500 to $3,000 per year. And typically the average financial plan is about $1,800 per year.
Are there any policies which will not increase monthly premiums as one gets older? I had to leave a previous policy due to the increases.
So for long-term care insurance, the company who issues the policy always has the ability to go to the state commission and ask for a premium increase. One of the nuances, though, is that if you do get a premium increase, the company will typically offer the ability to restructure the policy by changing the benefit amount or changing the benefit period to maintain similar premiums, but it would lead to a decreased benefit in that regard. I think one of the other key things is that as it relates to long-term care insurance, that we typically run into the situation where they have what are called flexible benefits, which is where they provide a set amount of benefits. So, for example, $250,000, and whether you use it over 2 years or 20 years is entirely up to you. But at the same time, the premiums do vary depending on the policy type.
How much would updating a financial care plan developed in a state other than Virginia cost? And what considerations rise to the top as it relates to differences across the states?
So I would say that the differences as they arise across the states are specifically the care cost and then state income taxation and estate planning rules that factor into the financial planning equation. If a financial care plan was developed in a different state, so what we do is start by analyzing the information that was previously provided and then incorporating that into a financial planning document that was completed by our firm.
So we have a lot of people who are early onset. They weren't expecting a diagnosis, so they can't apply for long-term care insurance. And the spouse is worried about all of their funds being depleted before they even get of age of needing it for themselves. Can you give an example of what you might encourage a family to do to help with that? I know there's been discussions in the past of possible separating and being divorced so that your finances are together. What do you suggest for people in that scenario?
So from a general standpoint, in that kind of scenario, my view is that the first step would be looking at the household finances to figure out what degree of care can be funded and for how long, and comparing the care costs with the income and expenses of the household, in addition to what assets may be available. From an estate planning and Medicaid planning perspective, that is when the divorce concept can be factored in, but does vary case by case depending on what the financial situation is.
This is kind of a weird question. If people get divorced and they do it because on the books, that's what they say, but I would think that some of these people continue their living situation. So couldn't somebody out there look at it and say, you got divorced just because, and that could be a problem? You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for divorce decrees, to my knowledge, there has to be a formal separation of a set period of time. But it is a strategy that's used by a lot of folks from an estate planning, Medicaid planning perspective. And for all intents and purposes, you can still maintain the same relationship for the most part. There'll just be a period of time where there's separated living. But as divorce goes, you have the ability to segment assets to an individual spouse.
Yeah.
And the goal being to qualify for Medicaid faster.
Could you talk a little bit about the auxiliary grant that Virginia has that families can utilize?
I apologize. I'm not very familiar with the auxiliary grant. Okay. So not something that I'm readily familiar with.
Questions? I don't have any. Is there any other questions out there in our virtual world? Could you give us an example of a typical case that comes to you and how you provide for the caregiver?
Sure. So we had a case a few months ago where one spouse had Parkinson's and dementia and was in his early 70s. And the spouse had no care needs at the time. And we started by analyzing what the assets were in the household, what income was coming in, and not only the care costs, but what the expenses were in the household as well. We worked with this person to identify different care options in the community to try to triangulate what best fit those financial needs. And then as the process progressed, it became apparent that we had to start consulting both estate planning and Medicaid planning attorneys to figure out an alternate solution given the high degree of care costs that the spouse was going to require. And in that situation, ended up proceeding with the divorce option. And the spouse qualified for Medicaid shortly after the divorce decree. And typically, one thing that we've heard from the state or from Medicaid planning attorneys is that if the intent is to qualify for Medicaid, typically it's most beneficial to enter a private pay facility for 2 to 3 months and then apply for Medicaid, as it is much harder to go into a facility already being Medicaid qualified.
Okay. If you live with someone with dementia as a domestic partner, but are not married, what are the other partner's obligations financially?
So I think from a financial obligation standpoint, whether you're domestic partners or married, I think it's a conversation between you, your spouse, and the professionals that you work with to kind of triangulate what degree of financial resources that you're able to commit. And that answer differs for every single person in this world. And there's no perfect answer, but it's really a decision that you kind of make yourself with your spouse or loved one to triangulate what works best for your situation.
In the case of a divorce, would the spouse who is not sick still have say-so about the health care of the other person?
Yes, your estate documents can be set up in a way where you are that person's healthcare proxy if something were to ever.
Doesn't the state require a 5-year look back before Medicaid is approved? Doesn't this affect the divorce route?
So the 5-year look back does occur for Medicaid in the state of Virginia. And the look back primarily relates to non-divorce scenarios where you're segmenting assets, either using trusts or through individual bank accounts, what have you. In the concept of the divorce proceeding, that's where the 5-year look back rule changes a bit. It doesn't apply as in the same way.
If one goes on Medicaid, can you give an idea of funds that will be considered and over what period of care?
So from a Medicaid planning standpoint, if memory serves, Virginia, the spouse not on Medicaid is able to have just over $130,000 in assets outside of the home, which are referred to as non-countable assets, and then also a set amount of income per month up to the limitation. The spouse who's under care is capped at a set amount of income per month, and the rest does go to Medicaid. The assets also have to be below a certain level as well. So from that standpoint, how you segment those different assets from a planning perspective, and working with a Medicaid planning attorney in that regard, to me is paramount.
Do you have any other questions?
To get involved with a financial planner, obviously the first step is a phone call to make an appointment. So when you make that appointment, do they tell you what they need from you when you come in? Or is it at that time that you come in and sit down? I'm just thinking as far as how many appointments, what's the time involved as far as getting things established?
So typically with clients we work with, we start by doing an initial consultation, which is free of charge, and we're sharing what our services are, and kind of starting to understand your needs from a financial planning perspective and what you're looking to achieve. And then from there, we provide a quotation on the fee for our services. And then once someone decides to move forward, then we do what's called a strategy session, where we request financial documents to be able to build a financial plan, and then compile all of that along with our recommendations and walk through everything that we have found and kind of our initial observations. And then after that initial strategy session, we typically have semi-annual meetings with clients to review how everything is tracking, kind of where they are from a financial perspective, how things have changed, and then develop recommendations based on that front as well. And there are some clients who meet with more frequently, some more sporadically, but it's really based on your needs. So generally the time commitment is a bit more upfront, specifically with providing the different financial documents, which we provide a list of, generally what we'd ideally like to have to be able to provide recommendations at the highest level. And then from there, like I said, we develop that initial financial plan, which then gets updated every time we meet. And there's consistent monitoring and oversight of both assets, and then also how you're tracking towards those goals.
How much does a review of assets cost and a plan to protect them?
So from a financial planning perspective, like I said, our fee ranges from $1,500 to $3,000 per year. Is typically $1,800 per year. You have the option of doing ongoing financial planning every year, or you could do it just for 1 year, and that would include a review of assets.
How long do we need to plan for long-term care?
So unfortunately, there's no good answer. For some folks, the answer that is a couple months. For others, 20 years. But our view is, as much as you can plan for the different scenarios, it is kind of what we advise. And the key is that knowing if X, Y, and Z happens, what your next move is going to be is one thing that we advise very heavily on. So you kind of know going in, if this happens, here's how we would proceed, and kind of have that decision tree, so to speak.
Do you encourage clients to have trusts?
Depends on the client. Trusts can be beneficial. And one of the key tenets of trust is that you have the ability to have a bit more control in terms of how beneficiaries receive the different assets. And then for certain tax planning, estate tax planning perspectives, assets over a certain level can make trust extremely beneficial. And there are many different kinds of trusts, but a lot of it is on a case-by-case scenario. But definitely trusts can be beneficial, but I don't think they're only necessary depending on what you're trying to achieve.
Right now, basically, pretty much almost everything we have is a joint situation. Are you recommending, or do they normally recommend, at what point are we separating things, or maybe putting, like, in the last several years, the cars are now in my name, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens down the road as far as what's the recommendation, as far as I'm thinking long term, if my spouse passes and everything is in our name, the process that I will have to go through as far as switching things over, or is it better for things to be in my name now? Or does it make a difference?
If something is jointly held and the other person on the joint account passes, the account reverts automatically to you. So that being one executed piece. The reason for individual titling would be, if from a care planning perspective, if those assets could be utilized for care costs and the care provider knew that assets were in their name, they may view that as a way to fund care. And it would also have an impact from a Medicaid planning perspective as well. So my view is that the key would be from an estate planning perspective to work with a estate planning attorney and Medicaid planning attorney who can kind of advise on specifically how to segment things.
And is that something that you all do, or is that somebody else?
So that would be a referred service that we would connect you with a professional that we work with.
So besides a financial planner, I would have to get an estate planner too?
And the estate planner would work on developing wills, power of attorney, et cetera. And then also coming up with how assets can be segmented. But Medicaid planning attorneys, many do also work as estate planning attorneys. So they offer that dual service.
I think this ties right into that. I already have an estate plan, POA, living will, executor, etc. Would there be any benefit to having your firm review it all?
So from an estate planning perspective, so we have at Ameriprise a gentleman at the corporate office who is an estate planning attorney who can review estate documents as part of the financial planning service offering, but wouldn't be able to make updates to those documents, just opine on his take on them.
Is there any other questions out in virtual world or in the room? You guys have had lots of great questions for him.
I just got a quick question. When I retired, when we met with the financial advisor, the first question he asked us was, do you have long-term care? Which I'd had for years through my company, with my employer. And my wife and I were both on it. We still have it. Is that any problem at all? I mean, that would go all the way back to probably before the year 2000 that I was paying into that. I still am paying. My wife pays quarterly, and I pay once a year. And I don't think that there would be any problem of any kind since we've had it so long. Okay.
And the one thing I would make sure is that, with that long-term care provider, that you're getting either quarterly or annual statements to understand how benefits may have changed over time, and any updates with the policies. But generally, if there are some employers, usually before 2010, who did offer that as a part of their benefits package.
When should people initiate their long-term care insurance?
So I think it depends on the person, and my view is the ideal sweet spot is your mid 40s to early 50s.
For the assessment for long-term care to actually utilize the plan you paid for.
So for the state of Virginia, as it relates to long-term care, you are eligible for benefits if you have trouble doing 2 of the 6 activities of daily living, which can be dressing, feeding, and anything of the like. And when the assessment individual from the insurance company were to come by to do their assessment, they would verify that 2 of those 6 activities are unable to be done. That's what they would use as criteria for starting to pay benefits. But again, between that assessment and the start of coverage, there is that waiting period, depending on what your policy states.
Okay, we have a question from Dell. I'm going to open the mic for him. Dell, go ahead and ask your question.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. If one already has long-term care insurance and the patient living in the home requires a great deal of caregiver care, how do you file for income tax if you want to deduct those expenses, those long-term care expenses that aren't paid by the insurance company? It doesn't cover all of the expenses of care in the home.
And I'll start with a disclaimer. While I'm a CPA, I'm not a formal tax advisor, and definitely consulting your CPA would be the step. But from a tax perspective, the benefits from long-term care would offset the deductible medical expenses, and then any medical expenses above the long-term care benefits would be deductible if they're over 7.5% of adjusted gross income.
If your long-term care insurance will pay up to $250 per day, and you spend $150 a day, would that extend the length of your insurance coverage, or have you just lost out on $100?
So there are two types of long-term care policies. There's one where if you begin to draw on it, they will pay out the set amount per day, regardless if you use it all. So in that example, if you use $100 per day and the policy is $250, they would give you the full $250 on a daily basis, and that would continue until the policy benefit runs out. Additionally, there are separate kinds of policies where if you only need $100 a day, they'll pay out $100 a day, and you just remit any invoices to the insurance company, and then they would pay, and that would inherently extend the length of the policy.
Oh, hold on. Sorry, I didn't know she was going to talk again. Jill, go ahead and request your hand up again so that I can give you access. I apologize. Go ahead, Del.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, you can. Go ahead.
Okay, it keeps muting itself. I was saying with our long-term care policy, it pays $360 a day, but our expenses exceed that significantly. So my accountant says that this is a gray area as to whether or not they're an employee or an independent contractor. So I don't know which way to turn and how to deduct this. And I understand I have to have a written record of the caregiving expenses in order to deduct them.
And then my view would be deferring to your CPA on that and asking them with the current care being provided, what documentation is required, and then additionally inquiring with the CPA of whether independent contracting versus an employee at a facility is most beneficial from a tax perspective.
But do you know what the government requires from us?
Not offhand, no. And like I said, I think that would best be a question for the CPA.
Okay. Well, he said that it was not clear. It's not black and white. It's a gray area. If you write checks rather than paying cash, then you've got a record. You've got documentation. You've got a record. But I still don't know whether I need to be filing with the government, with the IRS, and withholding tax and this kind of thing. So, what kind of a CPA or what kind of an accountant do you turn to who is very knowledgeable about this situation?
So I think accountants who have had clients in similar situations who are specialists in the area are generally extremely helpful in the situation.
Thank you.
All right. Do we need a certain amount of assets to do financial planning with you and your company?
Nope. With financial planning, we do with anyone regardless of level of assets.
Anybody else have any questions? Okay. If that is the case, we would like to thank everyone for being here with us, and please do look on our website for the next upcoming events that we have. You can go to insightmcc.org/events. Some upcoming events to look forward to. We're doing an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care class May 17th, which is next Wednesday. It is an 8-hour course. If you're a professional, it can lead you to getting your certified dementia practitioner certification. May 24th, we're doing a virtual dementia tour, which I highly advise if you would like to have an experience of what it's like to have dementia. May 31st, we're starting our online caregiver at a glance workshop. June 7th, we have a great author spotlight with Tim Johnson about welcoming LGBT residents for care. June 14th, we have a care partner training on driving and dementia. We're doing it in person in Fairfax and in person in Sterling. This one will not be recorded. So we look forward to seeing you all next month. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Insight Memory Care at any time. Thank you.